Hello everyone, welcome to Reading Culture, and this will be our final video on Beowulf. Where we last left off, we had just started going into that final section of the poem, the Battle of Beowulf with the dragon. So, if you recall, after the defeat of the monstrous Grendel and his mother, we have a return to the end of the yachts by Beowulf, and then we have a 50-year time jump. Right. In the interim, Beowulf's king Higelac has led a raid on the Franks, which has resulted in his death. Beowulf has refused the throne, and that is offered to him by the queen Hyd, and instead, the son of Hyd and Higelac, Hiadred, becomes the king of the yachts. He harbors fugitive princes from the king of the Swedes, and ultimately is killed in battle against the king of Sweden. This leaves the cousin of King Higelac, Beowulf, as king of the yachts. Now, 50 years on or so, he's the elderly, gray, hoary king, just like Hrothgar was. However, unbeknownst to him, a treasure hidden by the last survivor of a race wiped out through violent strife, and possessed for untold centuries by a dragon. Part of that treasure has been pilfered by a slave. The result of this stealing of the cup from the dragon results in terrible retribution by the dragon. He burns that hall, that perhaps rival to Heorot, the hall of Beowulf, burned to the ground. And perhaps even the entire settlement, we don't know. So as we pick up at this point, Beowulf, so far into his kingly rule over the yachts, and so old and near the end of his life, is faced yet again with this assault in the hall, and far more terrible even than Grendel's, as the hall itself does not remain. Right? This attack on everything that he has built, attack on civilization, maybe you could say, by this force of chaos, this beast that cannot be reasoned with. And so Beowulf at this point is faced with a decision. He has to choose to venture out, to fight the dragon. Battle is once again going to be a necessary thing. The very first thing that we see is that he has to locate this dragon's hoard, the cave, the hall, the mountain hall, you could say, of the dragon. It apparently was hidden. That's perhaps why the slave came upon it unawares, but they must find the slave. The slave, having been found, does not want to go. After all, who would want to return to the lair of the dragon? He escaped once with his life. Who's to say if he would again? In other words, the slave is a coward, lacks courage. Beowulf forces his hand, and indeed he is led to the location of the dragon. Before the last part of the story is commenced, we get another digression. We've had many of these digressions throughout. We've had, of course, digressions on Threawaru and Inyeld, right, and the story of their strife. And we've had digressions, if you indeed want to call them that, considering how important they are to the story, telling us about all that has happened in the 50-year interim that has led to the deaths of Higelac and Hiadred, and the coming of Beowulf into the kingdom. We get one last digression at this point, the story of Hrethel, the king, grandfather of Beowulf, and father of Higelac. The story of King Hrethel is interesting. You see, he is faced with a horrible decision, or horrible situation. We've talked before about this culture, this feuding culture, this tribal culture, where the death, particularly the violent death of a kinsman, must be avenged. Either accepting weregild, man money, must be had, or vengeance. Well, what happens? Why is kinslaying so awful? That thing which Beowulf accuses Unferth of. Because no restitution can truly be had when the very perpetrator is part of the same kin group as the slain one. And so it is that Higelac, who one would not have expected to have come into the kingdom, being the youngest of three brothers, so it is that his older brother is killed by his other older brother, accidentally, an arrow gone amiss. Now, it's possible that this is related to a Norse myth. Whether or not the Anglo-Saxons would have known it is unknown. Uh, there's a story in Norse mythology of Balder, son of Odin, who is competing in a little contest. He's immortal, invincible, and so they're shooting arrows at him as kind of a game. But his brother, who is blind, is tricked by the god of mischief, Loki, into firing a mistletoe dart at him. And the mistletoe was the only thing that could harm Balder. And so Balder is slain by his own brother. And this is the harbinger of Ragnarok, the Norse apocalypse. Whether or not this story of Hrethel's sons, one killed by the other accidentally with an arrow, is an echo of this, we don't know. But the key point here is that this kind of kinslaying means that Hrethel cannot avenge his own son. But the slayer it's himself, his son. Beowulf gives a poetic analogy of this. He says it is like a father who must see his son hanged upon the gallows. For another example of this kind of retribution being impossible is in the case of an official judicial execution. A father cannot avenge his son who has been justly executed by the king. And so we once again see this system, this broken system of violence and retribution and even justice, characterized by Beowulf. Before he goes out to meet that which, again, cannot be bartered with, will accept no were-guild, but can only be destroyed. Beowulf, despite being so advanced in years, makes a decision. He's going to fight the dragon himself, no others, despite all the men he's brought with him. And so he ventures into the dragon's hall alone. His small wooden shield burns to ashes in his hands when he meets the fires of the dragon. He's pinned down. He is doomed. And the men wait outside, awaiting his fate. But one of them is the character Beowulf, a kinsman of Beowulf. And Beowulf will not stand by and watch his liege and lord die in this battle without trying to aid him. He exhorts the other men who have sworn oaths of loyalty, have accepted rings and other treasures of beneficence from their king, and who owe him their aid. He exhorts them to come with him into the dragon's hall to help Beowulf, but they are cowards. They refuse. After all, what could be more fierce than a dragon whose heart would not fall back at such a request? They refuse. They run away. Beowulf does not. He charges into the hall. Beowulf, I will aid you, he says. And so they are both there fighting the dragon. Beowulf himself ends up in the dragon's grasp, bleeding out, his neck pierced by the fangs of the creature. But Beowulf, knowing, as of course everyone knows, you can't pierce dragon scale, Beowulf attacks it with his sword, Nalling, and it does nothing. Just like Hrunting could not destroy Grendel's mother, or any swords other than the giant sword could effectively hurt Grendel. So Nalling fails him here. But Beowulf, attacking from underneath the dragon's soft underbelly, its only weak spot, pierces the belly of the beast. Beowulf, pulling out his dagger, cuts it down the front, and this creature, the very instantiation of chaos and avarice itself, is defeated. It seems that we are now set up for the typical tale. The great hero, with the grip of 30 men in each hand, has defeated the monster, saved the kingdom. It's not that simple. Beowulf staggers forward and collapses, nearly dead. This could be, perhaps, another mythical echo. We see a very similar story again in later Norse sources. The story of Thor, god of thunder, and the Midgard serpent. The serpent which enfolds, like the Leviathan of biblical mythology, the entire world, the very, again, instantiation of chaos, and that which lurks at the edges of reality and experience. And in the final Ragnarok, the final battle of the gods, Thor will fight this beast, and he will kill it. Though in the killing, not only will the world be submerged in the waters of chaos, but he himself will take 9 steps and then fall down dead. Whether or not this is a story that the Anglo-Saxons would have known, we don't know. But this battling of a hero against the forces of chaos and their mutual destruction and the mutual destruction of the world, it's seen here in a microcosm, a kind of historical slice of this pattern that we see. Beowulf falls to the ground. Beowulf comes to him. Beowulf wants to see treasure. That's one thing that he has won, is the treasure of the dragon. So Beowulf brings it for him to see. The other thanes, sheepishly one can imagine, come in, seeing their lord lying there, bleeding. Beowulf reproaches them, calls them cowards. How could you have accepted all the armor you wear is from him? And yet here he lies. No help to you. They leave in shame, and Beowulf spends the last moments with Beowulf, who laments the fact that he has no heir. We've seen the consequences of a kingless realm, shield chafing, at the very beginning of the poem. We remember, right, the destitution of a land that is kingless. Beowulf has not left an heir. We don't know why, but just it seems like the line of the Hretling dynasty came to an end with the death of Hiadred, so this line, at least directly, will come to an end. We can only assume Beowulf will inherit the kingdom. And so Beowulf, Dragon Slayer, dies. There's a confusing line in the poem about his soul, and it's seeking this light of the just, but does it mean he went to heaven? Or is he in hell with the pagans? We don't know. Perhaps the poet deliberately was trying to be vague, not wanting to claim him being in heaven, given the fact that he wasn't a Christian, but perhaps not wanting to condemn him either. After all, he's clearly presenting him as a hero here. Though was it his pride that led him to fight the dragon alone? And what has he gained? Well, he's gained the treasure, as one of the last things he says. And he's gained, well, he's gained the death of this creature. The creature is eventually pushed over the cliff, falls onto the shoreline, and we can only assume that it is eventually received by the sea. Chaos back to chaos. And the treasure is eventually carted back as well. But there are many traditions in Germanic mythology of the cursedness of dragon treasure. It's often not a good idea to keep it. But they've gained it. Beowulf perhaps needs something to build the kingdom on. Heralds are sent back to the yachts to tell them that their king is dead. But he brings more bitter tidings as well. You see, all of the feuds that have accumulated over the years are still there simmering. The Franks, the Swedes, who knows, maybe even the Danes, the Shadobards. It seems that the strength, the power of Beowulf have kept these forces of chaos at bay. But with his death, the chains are loosed. The herald says that they will come, these warring tribes, and they will wipe out the yachts. From what we know of the legends and myths and even historical facts around the tribe of the yachts, it seems that's exactly what happened. There's a reason why the Swedes have Sweden, the Danes, Denmark, the Norwegians, Norway. These are all countries that still exist today. But there is no Yachtland. The yachts were wiped out of history. The forces of chaos overwhelmed them. It was their Ragnarok, their apocalypse. With the death of Beowulf, it seems Beowulf was not enough to hold these things back. So we see that chaos has not truly been triumphed over. The dragon was killed, yes, but so was Beowulf. Order and chaos may both have fallen, but chaos is still there, and the forces of order are not able to hold it back. It's a very dire ending. Again, this kind of prognostication, it's not narrativized. We don't actually see the fall of the kingdom of the yachts, but we feel it. The death of Beowulf is the death of Yachtland, like Hector is the death of Troy, even if we don't see it. But how does the poem itself end? These are the final lines, beginning at line 3156. Then the Wedder people, that's the Geats, wrought for him a barrow, that's Beowulf, wrought for Beowulf a barrow on the headland. It was high and broad, visible from afar to sea voyagers. And in 10 days they built the beacon of that battle-brave one. The ashes of the flames they enclosed with a wall, as worthily as the most clever of men could devise it. In the barrow they placed rings and bright jewels, all the trappings that those reckless men had seized from the hoard before. Let the earth hold the treasures of earls, gold in the ground, where it yet remains, just as useless to men as it was before. Then round the mound rode the battle-brave men, offspring of noble men, 12 in all. They wished to voice their cares and mourn their king, utter sad songs and speak of that man. They praised his lordship and his proud deeds, judged well his prowess, as it is proper that one should praise his lord with words, should love him in his heart when the fatal hour comes, when he must from his body be led forth. So the men of the Geats lamented the fall of their prince, those hearth companions. They said that he was of all the kings of the world the mildest of men, and the most gentle, the kindest to his folk, and the most eager for fame. That is how the Epic of Beowulf ends, as it began, with a funeral. It began with Shield Shefing, mythically coming out of the sea and returning to it, like Arthur, his boat going out into that endless expanse, and received we know not by whom. So Beowulf ends on the pyre, his thanes lamenting around him, the smoke going up to heaven, his soul we know not where. And with him, it seems, goes the kingdom. The last word said about him is that he was the most eager for fame. Is that the cause of this? Was it his pride, his eagerness for fame, which led him ultimately to fight the dragon alone and led to his death? If he had not, perhaps he would have lived, survived the dragon assault. We can't know. But what we do know is this. He is described here clearly in terms of praise. Right? Kindest to his folk, most gentle. This was a hero. Was it a successful hero? This tale of Beowulf is the tale of 3 battles against monsters, one of which seems rather, in many ways, disconnected from the other 2, all victorious. This is the focus. Behind those stories, there is a tapestry of feud and politics, the death of kingdoms and princes. Perhaps some would prefer that, more like Homer, the focus would have been on that. Great sieges and battles between kings, rather than this folk tale, fantasy, fairy story against the monsters. But that's exactly the point. The monsters are the focus, not the politics. This isn't the same kind of political epic that some would want. It is a fairy story, in some ways like folktale, but it is also that epic. The great hero against the monster. We don't need to see Beowulf fighting other kings once we've seen him fight the dragon, the most elemental manifestation of the same forces which are playing themselves out throughout the entire poem. So what kind of a hero is Beowulf? Successful, unsuccessful? Well, he's certainly physically successful. All the monsters fall before him, even the last one, with help. He, it's true, though, fails to protect his people in the end. They come to ruin. Like the last survivor, hiding the last of the treasures of a forgotten people in a mound. Right? He's not mythical in the same way as someone like Balder from the Old Norse. Is he a tragic hero? There is a tragicness to him, certainly. He probably doesn't meet the criteria, though. What is his tragic flaw? Is it truly pride? It might be, as Professor Tolkien once noted, that it's sufficient to say that Beowulf is a man, and that for him, and for many, is sufficient tragedy.